Now, the American Gunsmithing Institute presents another instructional video on firearms design, operation, maintenance, and repair.
Welcome to the Armor's course on the Ruger 1022. This gun's been immensely popular. Came out about 1963 and hit the world like a cyclone. Now think about what it was when it came out. It was really very, very revolutionary because it held 10 shots and had a flush magazine, where all the guns before that held 10 shots and had a clip had this big banana sticking out of them. And we weren't used to that look in those days. This gun also came out, when it came out in 3 different stock styles. This style, which is carbine. Then they had a sporter, which was intermediate and a more conventional looking stock, like a sporting rifle. Then they had international, which in fact was a Mannlicher style stock. And checkered. And they worked. And the guns were just so popular, it was unbelievable. They went on allotment. Ruger simply couldn't produce them fast enough. There was a lot of guns for the money. I think they sold, I think even the most expensive one was $79.95 or $69.95 brand new when it first came out. The thing that made it nice was it really did work. It worked well and was nice looking and just took the world by storm. I don't know if Stern or Bill Ruger actually designed this gun or not, but it was one of the earlier guns to come out of the factory plant, or the Ruger plant. He'd had the standard automatic and the single action line of guns, and he had a little single shot pistol based on a single action revolver. He had a 44 Magnum carbine, if I remember correctly, and then this gun came out, and this gun just went nuts. It's an easy gun to work on. It's a little different to work on, a little different in design, has some innovative ideas about it. The way the barrel attaches is really quite clever. The fire control or disconnect system is a little bit different than what we're used to seeing too. I don't know how many of this model have been sold. I would guess millions. It's extremely popular with the add-on people, and probably started about 10 years after this gun was introduced. There were so many that people started making accessories, and you can make this gun look like anything you want it to look like by just adding this or that and taking off this or that. All kinds of people, many manufacturers make all kinds of stuff for it. First, we'll show you how the gun works. And to take it apart, so you can see the insides, and see, if you notice, this gun's been all cut up. So you can see inside of it pretty well. To take it apart, first you need to remove the magazine. And there's 2 ways to take the magazine out. One, you can reach in and grab it, and your thumb will push in the magazine catch. Just reach in and grab it and pull it out. And the other way, if the magazine is fitted correctly, is that you just push the catch and it falls out. Either of those 2 methods should work. Then, to take it apart, you must remove the devices that hold it in. Now, this gun originally had a plastic barrel band around it here, and this screw. The barrel band is missing, so we just undo the screw. Now, it still won't come out, because the safety has to be in the half-on, half-off position. Now the stock comes right off. And we have the magazine that we've sectioned so you can see how it operates, and we'll show you a little bit about that later. We can see right here how the magazine catch works by pushing the catch. You see up there where it pushes on the actual magazine catch and pulls it out of the way. And you can see by looking here, when I press the button, so you go back. Well, all this is kind of an L-shaped piece of aluminum on a pin, and goes up into the side of that actual steel magazine catch and pulls it back. That's really quite straightforward and simple. And here we see the fire control mechanism. Now it has a bolt lock When the gun is empty, you can lock, or even before it's empty, you can lock the bolt back by pushing this in. Now I'll pull the bolt back, and you can watch. You'll see a piece of this rise and get in front of the bolt. Now when I keep it held and then let the bolt go forward, the bolt will snag that. It's supposed to snag it, there we go, and pulls it forward, and there's a little odd-shaped hole with a hook in it, and it pushes it in that hook. Now it stays. We can even pull a bolt back, it will not release. In order to release it, we have to pull a bolt back and push this little latch in such a direction, which is forward and down, that this piece pivots out of that little notch it's in. Now the bolt will close. As far as the fire control goes, and we'll see it better when we take it out of the gun, but when we pull the trigger has a sear disconnector in it and pivots in the trigger. When we pull the trigger, that moves it out of the way of the hammer, and the hammer will fall. Oops, I've got to take it off safe first. Now the trigger is still pulled. When the gun cycles, if I don't go all the way back, the hammer does not hit the disconnector. And I went to, see it's not cocked. Even though it's far enough back to cock, it's not cocked. But if you'll watch it, the hammer will come back and strike the disconnector and disconnect it. So you break the connection between it and the trigger. I will show you later in more detail how that works. Now viewed from the top, you can see the back of the bolt right here. You see the firing pin down the center. When we pull the trigger, you can watch the hammer fall to strike the firing pin. Now the bolt stops. I don't think you can see it, but you can see it from the top, I believe. You can see that pin right there. That's what stops the riveted motion of the bolt. So it doesn't beat out the back of the receiver, it stops against that pin. To take the bolt out, you have to take that pin out. It feeds pretty straightforward. Now see, the rotary magazine pushed that round up, and it feeds kind of from the side, so it doesn't come straight up like most magazines, but somewhat from the side. And as we'll see later when we take the bolt out, the bolt has its bolt face kind of sideways too. So that instead of being the straight up and down bolt face, it's kind of like this. It simply strips the round forward, and the magazine is the guide, and it does a pretty good job of guiding it right into the chamber. The ejector is two things. It can be the ejector or it can be the magazine, and I'll show you here. Now watch when the round ejects in relation to the bullet in the chamber mouth. You see when it ejected shortly after the bullet left the chamber, didn't it? Now we're going to drop the magazine. Whoops. Now watch when it ejects. The bullet is well past the mouth of the chamber, isn't it? Well past. Now it's going to eject. That's because the gun, the later guns have two ejectors. One is on the magazine. It's this piece right here. Not this, but right here. Yeah, right there. And the other one is the actual part called an ejector, and it's right there in the action. And you can see it right there. That's the ejector. Now in the early guns, you only had the one ejector, and sometimes we had some ejection problems. Ruger put in the second one. And although Ruger may profess otherwise, there are some variations in the manufacturing tolerance of this gun, And not all magazine ejectors function, just like not all ejectors function. You still get a gun that won't eject sometimes, but it's not as common as it used to be a long time ago. I guess it's called a backup, isn't it? Got two ejectors. We'll take the trigger guard out now and show you how that operation works. Or maybe we'll take it out. Usually we push the pins out. Pretty simple. Here's the ejector, so that if the one on the magazine should fail because it's worn or broken off or the magazine hangs a little low, in theory this one will get it. If this one's too low, in theory the one in the magazine will get it. It's just held in by a pin. It fits in that slot in the trigger guard. Now the hammer comes out easily if you decide to do it. But right now we're going to have a look-see at how it operates. And what we have, and we'll take it out in a minute and show you, but what we have is the trigger, and then pinned to the trigger, back here where you can't see it, is the disconnector. It's this piece right here. And it attaches to this piece, which is the sear, down inside at the back. Now this piece pivots, the actual sear pivots on the trigger pivot pin, so that the trigger can move and that sear does not have to move. And I'm going to unhook it and see. I'll unhook the disconnector and pull the trigger. You see the sear does not move. When the disconnector is hooked up, I pull the trigger, the disconnector grabs hold of the sear, and since the disconnector is pinned to the trigger, not through the trigger pivot pin, but pinned to the trigger, when the trigger moves, the disconnector must move with it. And since it's got a grab on the sear, it'll move the sear, and you see the hammer falls. Now when the gun cycles and the bolt comes back, a little hump on the back of the hammer will strike the disconnector and break the connection between it and the sear. So now the sear has caught the hammer, but the trigger's still pulled. Then when you release the trigger spring pushes the trigger forward, compressing the disconnector sear spring slightly and allowing the disconnector to get behind and then grab the sear. And now we're ready for the next shot. We'll take it out and give you a better shot, better look. That's the mainspring. It's a very easy gun to work on. You can see the hook on the disconnector right there. Goes in. And the spring goes in a little hole in the disconnector, and we just put the whole mess into place and push the cross pin through. And now it's latched up, so when I pull the trigger, the disconnector has to move with it, and so does the sear. But if I unhook it like that, and you see the trigger and sear, well, trigger and sear are independent from each other. So when the gun is cocked and ready to go, you pull the trigger, the sear is forced to move down, you see. When it cycles and the hammer falls, gun fires, bolt comes back and pushes the hammer into the disconnector loses its grip on the sear pops up. And the bolt closes, the hammer comes forward and catches on the sear. When you let go of the trigger, since the sear can go no higher, but the trigger does, the spring pushes it just like that, and it resets. Now we'll take this out, set it up on the outside so you can visualize it. That's one good thing about Ruger got aluminum parts with steel pins and oversized holes, and it makes working on it pretty easy. Okay. It's set. The hammer's here, we pull the trigger, the sear has to move. The hammer comes back and strikes the disconnector and unhooks it from the sear. The sear pops up and hits the hammer. When the bolt goes closed, the hammer comes forward and catches on the sear, and the full cock notch and the sear. When the trigger returns, it resets the disconnector so it grabs the sear, ready for the next shot. We will take out the bolt lock and show you how that works. This is bolt down mode, or bolt operating mode, right there. Now when we want to lock the bolt, we push this like that, and the bolt hits here and shoves it forward and locks it down. Now the bolt, see, it can't go down because this notch and that little hole is in the way. So the bolt's locked back. When you pull the bolt back, it still doesn't move out of the way. There's a spring resting right here to hold that, so it stays in that position. Won't bounce out of the notch. To free it, you pull the bolt back and then press this up and back. It's hard to do, but and you have to kind of push it back, and the spring guides it right to there, and it goes down and stays down. If you just push it in, nothing happens. You've got to kind of push it back at the same time, and then there we go. That's how it works. You can buy a different bolt lock for this gun. It's an accessory, but it works the same way as this one, except that when you pull a bolt back, this spring automatically draws it back down. So you push it up and it locks, and then as soon as you pull a bolt back, this snaps down. The advantage is it's much easier to close the bolt. So you can push it and lock it back, and then when you want to change and go and shoot the gun again, just tap the bolt. This will automatically pop down. It's a handy little gadget to have, and I don't think they're very expensive, and I don't know who makes them, but they are around. And you notice how easy this gun is to fool with because everything just fits up on the outside, and the pins and things just go in and out real easily. I'm not going to take the safety out. Well, maybe I will. The safety fits in the trigger guard, and dead center it has a spring-loaded plunger. So when you take the safety out, be careful because it'll fly out and get you in the face or fly out and get lost. But you rotate the safety 90 degrees and then simply push it out. Now you see I've pushed it into the active or on position, and the plunger is dead center. So I'm going to push it out from the going on position clear out of the gun. I'm going to use a pretty good sized punch so that I will captivate the spring when I go past it. And that's our safety. And there's the spring and plunger for the safety. The magazine catch comes out really simply. And you can see how it works. It's really extremely simple, extremely simple. Get it right yet. There we go. You push here on the release button and it simply pulls the latch back. And the spring bottoms out in the hole in the trigger guard. That's what tensions the magazine catch. The bolt is very conventional in most respects. It has a captive operating handle or a combination of operating handle and recoil spring and guide assembly. And to take the bolt out, you must remove the pin that acts as a stop for the bolt. Then you pull the bolt back as far as it'll go. Now if you'll notice, in the receiver, there's a slot right here, a rail. Now the bolt lives on top of that. When the trigger guard is in, the bolt also lives on top of the trigger guard, so it can't fall down out of the action. To take it out, you must remove the stop pin and pull the bolt all the way back, then lift it up and out of the gun. And there's our recoil spring and guide assembly, including the operating handle. That's everything in the receiver except the barrel, and the barrel comes off uniquely. And I'll show you here. It uses an Allen wrench, but I'm going to use a screwdriver because the screws aren't very tight. And the screws are long, so this is going to take a little while. What's nice about this system is that this little hook, or claw if you want to call it that, catches the barrel right here. When you screw the screws into the front face of the receiver, these holes right here, it draws the barrel rearward with the screws and pushes it tight up against the front face of the receiver. This is an easy barrel to set back because there's no threads and there's no pin. So let's say that something happened and the extractor cut got too deep and the cases are blowing out. All you'd have to do is face off the barrel until you had good extractor cut and maybe reshape it and rechamber it to get the right depth. And let's say we took 50 thousandths off the end of the barrel, then take 50 off the barrel shank and put it back in. And providing you didn't take so much off that the draw system couldn't pull the barrel tight up against the shoulder of the receiver, that's all there is to it. Now if you've taken off too much, you then have to file some off of this face so that this drawing block could come rearward farther and take the barrel with it, because it is not supposed to touch here when the barrel's tight, but it should be close. So if you take off 50 thousandths, you're probably going to have to take 30 or 40 off of here to get clearance, although you may not, it just depends. All right. Now, the bolt is extremely simple, there's not much to it. The extractor is conventional, and so you simply pull back the extractor plunger and lift the extractor out, and the spring and plunger then come out the front. And the firing pin has a little return spring in it. So you drive out the pin and take out the firing pin, and we'll do that. There's the spring, and the firing pin is retained in the bolt by a bump right here. The metal's simply staked over and the firing pin can't come out upward. Now with the operating handle in place, the operating handle also holds the bolt. And it holds the firing pin so the firing pin can't come out. And then of course the cross pin keeps it from backing out. And the spring pushes it back so that the hammer can always get at it. And the spring simply rests, drops down inside the bolt like this. And you'll see a cross pin. You can't see too good from this side. You can from this side. A cross pin. That's simply a stop or a seat for that spring. That's all it is. The bolt's relatively simple. The gun is almost completely apart, and at this point you should pretty well understand how the parts work. We have the magic part over here. This is the magazine. This is the part that you're cautioned never take apart. The reason for this is that there's some nerve gas inside the magazine, and if you take it apart, you'll go blind. No, that's something else that makes you blind. Never mind, never mind. You need an Allen wrench that fits the Allen hole that you see here, and you simply unscrew this device. And as you do, this nut will tend to back out, so I have to hold my finger on it. When I get it unscrewed enough, I just push it and it'll rotate. I'm going to pull the spring out. They don't go in real easy afterwards sometimes. I'm not going to pull the spring out. Anyway, you can see what it's done. What they've done. They drilled a hole and countersunk it pretty deep, and they have the coil spring. That's it, with a piece like this going through the side, and you can probably see it. Spring goes. You can't see it, can you? Okay. So that the spring makes the rotor turn. When your magazine gets dirty, you do need to clean it, although they tell you not to. They tell you not to take it apart. The magazine's very easy to take apart, and it's very easy to put back together. So it's not the magic voodoo thing that some people would like you to think. Now, the way the gun feeds is with this feed mechanism, and it's very good, although it would work a little smoother if it were smoother, and you could smooth it up. Do not thin, if you do not thin this surface. You can smooth it just enough to get it smooth, and then this track that we see right here, the rim hits that and is elevated. And it wouldn't hurt to stone that so that it's smooth, because sometimes the rims have a tendency to stick on that. And here's our ramp itself, that area right here. And it would be nice to polish that. This makes the guns feel a little bit smoother, that's all. It's no big deal. This thing rarely wears out, but there were some that were made of softer material. Now, I think this is a type of steel, but there were some that were made of zinc or aluminum or something, and they did wear out. But these seem to hold up just about forever. And you need to look for a chamfer on the chamber mouth on the bottom and at the top, and leave the sides alone. This is a pretty good feeding gun, so the cartridge is guided left to right pretty well. It has a tendency to be high and low once in a while. That's why a little chamfering here, and not very deep, just enough to smooth it, so if a bullet nose hits there, it won't be cut by it. And on this particular barrel, we do have kind of a sharp lip right there, you see? So that could cut lead off, which of course that bullet won't fly out straight, and then the lead gets around the action and jams the action up. Now that it's completely apart, I'll show you in detail what I discussed earlier about the angled bolt face. You see, it is not, the extractor fits like this. The bolt face is not straight up and down like most. The extractor does not come in straight to the side. It comes in this way. You notice the belly of the bolt is offset and pointed that direction. And that's because the feed system of the magazine fits in the gun at an angle also. When the magazine is in the gun, it's like that. So we put a round in it and put it up in place. You can see what I'm talking about. That's where it's set. So the bolt is like this in the gun, and the magazine feed system is too. Bolt comes back, the round is pushed up, the bolt hits it, and pushes it into the chamber, but at that odd angle, not straight up and down like most. I probably scared you when I took that other gun apart so fast to show you how it worked. Now we have an uncut gun, and I'll take this apart slow and easy so you can relax and enjoy yourselves. To take the gun out of the stock, I usually take the magazine out first, but you don't have to. And we take off if it has the front band, we take off the front band. This one does. You don't have to take the screw out, just loosen it and slip the band off. And then we can take out or take loose the takedown screw. And I like to just pull it up and start started in the stock escutcheon so it stays there and doesn't rattle around. Now, if you try to pull the stock away from the gun, the safety will catch it right here. And if you push, it'll gouge in it and mar the stock. What you want to do is put the safety half on, half off. And now the stock will simply pass through. And it's apart. Now the rest of it comes apart by punching out, I should say the trigger guard comes off by punching out these two pins. And they usually come out easily. And here's the trigger housing complete. And then to take the bolt out, you need to pull the bolt all the way back so that the bolt is full length all the way back. You see there's a ridge cast into the receiver right here. And when the bolt goes all the way back, it's still being retained by that. But the bolt is stopped by this pin in the back of the receiver right here. So you have to punch out that pin. Now the bolt will go back far enough that the front of the bolt will clear that little ridge right there. Now I can lift up the front of the bolt while I hold the operating handle back. You see I got the operating handle held back. I'll lift up the front of the bolt. And then I simply twist the handle to bring the rear of the spring out of the receiver, pull it back like that, and then I tip it, and out she comes. Now the receiver is pretty well stripped except for the barrel, and we'll pop the barrel off. The barrel is retained by what I think is a clever system. They cut sort of a dovetail in the barrel. The receiver has a nose sticking out on it with kind of a reverse dovetail on it. They have this dovetail block. There's the two Allen screws that go in. You have to unscrew those and pull the barrel off. First you have to select the right size Allen wrench. I'm using a screwdriver to finish the job because there's so much turning to do, and I don't have one of those ball-ended Allen wrenches, which would save me a lot of time here. And these screws go in forever. I'm not sure why they are so long. I guess Ruger likes them that way. Not got tight. I've never had this gun apart before. Well, I don't know why that got so tight. There we go. I bet the screws bent. They normally are not that tight. Once they get broken loose, they come out easily. Doesn't appear to be bent, but it sure acts like it. Lift off our little block, and the barrel should simply pull off now. And it did. I just knew it was going to make a liar out of me. Now we have the receiver assembly apart. We'll take the bolt apart. The bolt has the firing pin and the extractor system in it. That's all that's in the bolt. The firing pin is held in by a roll pin, which is right here. Drive out the roll pin, and the firing pin and its returning spring system will come out. Now you can't see what I'm doing because I basically put my fingers around the roll pin. So the roll pin will come out between my fingers, but when it comes out, I won't lose it because it'll be captivated by my fingers when it finally comes free. You see the roll pin coming between my fingers now. Firing pin is out. And down inside that crack of the bolt slot is a spring. And that is simply the return spring for the firing pin as you've seen before. Now, the extractor itself is retained by a plunger. Pull the plunger back with a small punch, back as far as you can get it, and then lift the extractor out in a motion like this. So it's a rotating motion. Alright, this is stubborn, so I have to get a pair of pliers on it. There we go. That is much harder than most, and it's probably from dirt. Now I'm just pushing out the spring with a punch, and here's our very filthy plunger. Now the bolt assembly is now a bolt. Well, although we've taken the magazine apart in detail in the function part of this tape, we'll take it apart again rather quickly. This is a brand new magazine, of course, kind of tight. And here's our little nut. I'm unscrewing the shaft and push forward until the nut comes out. Now it's free. Pull it off. Take out our shaft. Lift off the front of the magazine, the rear of the magazine. Take out the cartridge guide, the rotor, and its spring. This goes together so easy we don't have to worry about how it is. We'll put it together later, as you know. The trigger housing has lots of parts. Scary to look at the first time. It's really easy to take apart. Pull the trigger, let the hammer fall, or actually guide it forward, and push it over center, and the mainspring and guide will come free of the hammer. You can just lift them out. We punch out the pin that holds the hammer, and it's right here. And lift out the hammer, and some other trash will come with it. So you've got the spring for the bolt lock and the hammer bushing right and left side. And you need to kind of remember which side the spring goes on until you get used to the gun. And it goes on the right hand side of the spring, and there's a dog leg. The dog leg should be on the forward side of the spring, the forward end of the spring, and should move inward into the receiver, into the trigger housing. Punch out the ejector pin. It's a little tighter. There's this pin right here. And I'm going to have to thrash this one. Once again, you notice just automatically I put my finger so that I'll catch the pin so it doesn't fly away too much. Out comes the ejector. And then I have one more pin to take out, and that is the pin that retains the other portion of the bolt stop. It's right here. And then the bolt stop will lift out the top. Now, when I took that out, That pin that holds the bolt stop also holds the magazine catch. And when I take out the magazine catch or magazine catch release lever and pull it out, the magazine catch will fly out. I put my finger over it, pull this off. There's the magazine catch and spring. Now the trigger comes out by pushing out its pin. Its pin is right here. So you punch and push it out, and again, they're usually not tight. Comes out between my little fingers. And now when I pull the pin out, the sear disconnector may well fly out of it. So I just put my finger over the top. It didn't. Sometimes they'll try. And in the trigger itself is a pin. That pin retains the actual disconnector. This piece is the sear. Push out that pin. Pin's gonna make a liar out of me. Oh, there it goes. Now the disconnector, sear, and spring will fall out of the gun. Then the trigger return spring is in the trigger guard sticking up. Once the trigger's out, it just pulls right out. All we have left now is the safety. The safety is held in place and detented by a spring-loaded plunger that goes right straight down in the trigger guard here. Just right dead center. And you can't push it out without breaking something. But what you can do is put the safety half on, half off, and rotate it 90 degrees. Now don't rotate it 180 degrees because you may be able to see it, but probably not. Down inside the trigger housing. Yes. You can see the shiny part, that's round. That's the diameter of the safety. You can see the flat to the side of it. Well, you want to rotate it so that the plunger is no longer retained by the notch on the other side of the safety, but if you rotate it 180 degrees, the plunger goes into that flat and it's very difficult to get it out. So you want to rotate it 90 degrees. And to help you, notice which direction the flat is on. You see? If I push it to the on position, the flat comes into play, doesn't it? So what we're going to do then is when we get it turned 90 degrees, we're going to pretend like we're going to put the safety on. We're going to push it on so far it comes out. And it'll usually rotate with your fingers. Just put it between your fingers and rotate it. And I felt it go over. Now if you look down here, you may be able to see way down in there, you might be able to see the very head of the plunger, right? Right there. Just barely see it. That's just about to slip into the safety's flat notch that clears for the trigger. Now we don't want it to go in there. And if it does, it's kind of difficult to get out. But what you have to do is rotate the safety against the plunger and then take a screwdriver and push the plunger down as you rotate the safety this direction. Rotate it so that your hand goes toward the top of the trigger guard from the rear. In this case, we're not going to let that happen. I've rotated the safety back just a teeny bit so it's not even close to that notch, and now I can push the safety out. Now, when you take the safety out, make sure you put your finger over the trigger housing because it's going to fly, the detent will. And it flew up and hit my finger pretty hard, and there it is. And you can probably see the hole in the trigger guard where it lives. And there we have it, perfect view. That's the hole that safety plunger lives in. Well, the gun is completely apart. Now I'm going to show you how to clean it, and we use an unconventional method in the shop here. I've been using it for a few years and I quite like it. And you can do it at home, and you notice that I have a little plastic container that Huggies wipes came in, and I have just a little tray with paper towel on it. We use a parts cleaner for automotive parts in the shop, and it has a pump and a reservoir and a drain board, a drain table. And for this show, this is fine, and if you're doing this at home, this will work fine. I would suggest you do it outside because it might make your wife unhappy if you did it in your sink. Another disadvantage using the sink is sometimes the little pieces go down the drain. We don't want that. Anyway, what I use is common soap cleaner. It's called Simple Green. You can buy it in automotive shops, parts houses and stuff. And I've used a lot of cleaners, alcohol-based cleaners, petroleum distillates, and various soaps, and I don't like them. This I like because I like the smell of it, and it does not make my hands and skin burn and peel, and doesn't make the sores and cuts that I have from this trade get all festered up. And it really works. Now this gun is relatively dirty, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to spray it on all the parts so that they get wet all over. I'm going to wait a few seconds, I'm going to start scrubbing them, and the oil will just practically fall off. Let's do it. Now wet my toothbrush, give it a shot, and start the cleaning process. Now the bolt was very, very dirty. I think I'll wait a minute on it. I'll start with the hammer, which wasn't quite so bad. I simply drop it in the rinse water. This was very, very dirty. The pins and springs and things weren't too bad, so I don't have to do much scrubbing on them, or any. The extractor plunger was very, very dirty. I have to give it a little check here. That block was pretty clean. The extractor was very dirty. And extractors have a tendency to get a buildup of lead and burnt powder and tends to stick very tight. And you can see this one has some stuff on it. That's still tight on there. But it'll probably come off my fingernail real quick. No, it didn't. It's coming though. And the hook had a bunch of load on it, and that's off just that quickly. And now the stuff that's on the side is also virtually gone. The firing pin wasn't bad. The magazine catch wasn't bad. Now we have the bolt, which was very, very dirty. And the stuff practically falls off of it now after sitting for a couple of minutes. Give this another shot. The bolt face was filthy. Still is. Clean now. And the firing pin track, I can't get the brush down there, but the punch goes, and that stuff just falls out of it. Likewise, the extractor's cut. Okay, bolt is sparkly clean. Trigger guard didn't have too much stuff in it because I'd pretty much taken care of it when I milled all the insides of it out, or the sides of it off. What I had was some shavings more than anything else. In she goes, and the receiver is pretty dirty, particularly around where the barrel goes. And the top of the receiver has that track in it. It was pretty much full of crud. we have a buildup of lead from years of use over here. The toothbrush can't get into it, but the punch goes along and just lifts it right out. The shop throw it in. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rinse these parts off and set them out on top of another dry paper towel and dry them. Now you can dry them by hand, and then if they have crevices and holes, put them in something warm like on top of your stove or something. Make sure that no water remains in the holes. If you have air holes, then of course if you have compressed air, then just blow the parts off until they're dry. It's clean and dry and ready to oil. And you'll notice the feel of the parts is just amazing. It is just totally clean, totally oil-free, and this simple green seems to take the dirt right out of the pores of the metal. It has a unique feel. I love it. Anyway, we're going to squirt it with the oil and rinse off, I shouldn't say rinse off, but wipe off the excess oil and assemble the gun. And the oil that we use is break-free, and I've been using it in the shop for years and years, and I like it. It's a very good rust preventative. It's a very good lubricant because it contains Teflon, and it's got a cleaner in it so that any dirt that's in the steel is kind of lifted out and it is replaced by this very fine Teflon. So that if you clean a gun and oil it 3 or 4 or 5 times with break-free, the gun gets a very slick, smooth feel, and friction is reduced substantially, and the guns, of course, will hold up better. Anyway, I'm going to wet everything down, then wipe it off. I use plenty of oil. In fact, when we blue a gun, we dunk it in break-free. Well, that should do it. We just simply take a paper towel or a shop rag or something. We now wipe off all the excess oil. You don't have to be too precise while doing this because you're going to wipe it off some more as you assemble it too. But I like to wipe it because the spraying doesn't get oil every single place, and when you wipe it, it certainly does. Remember that the cleaner in this stuff will take off any surface dirt even when you wipe it down. And you see that the Kleenex or the paper towel is not real clean. And that's coming from this barrel that wasn't actually washed in a simple green. Alright, now I'm going to take it off of here and set it on there and start the actual reassembly process. I think we'll assemble a magazine first to get it out of our hair. Goes together pretty simple. If I could just remember how I did it. Now I put the rotor in, and the little spring with the hook on it sticks out so that this plate and the nut can go on it. And then we find the screw. Here it is. We put in our feed throat. There we go. I was trying to put it too low. Put our rotor back in. We put the rotor in, there's a little seat for the stem. See, it doesn't come out the end, but there's a seat in there, and the stem of the rotor should go into that little seat. And then we put the lid on it, and we take the nut, we put it in the spring, but see, the nut has a small hole in it. Now, I don't know that you can see it. It's right there. And the end of that spring has to go in that hole. There we go. And we'll start the screw, put my Allen wrench in it. Now I will tension the nut. Now the nut is what holds the spring, and the spring is what turns the rotor. What I want to do is I want to get from totally relaxed position, and we'll wind it clockwise. We'll wind it clockwise because we want the rotor to go clockwise. We'll wind it approximately 4 flats, and that's at the rest position. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, and push it in. That locks it. Now we'll screw the nut down. And just check it. I don't have quite enough, so I must not have had it at neutral position when I did that. So I have to loosen it back up and wind it up some more. And since it just barely makes it, I think we want to do it 4 more notches. Yeah. Okay, 1, 2, that's 2, gotta back this off again. 3, 4, and push it in. Now that locked it. Tight. Now it's fine. See? That's really very simple. Now the tension on the rotor is not real critical. 4 is enough. 5 won't hurt. 6 probably make it hard to load the last couple of rounds, but you get away with it. So it's not real critical. Magazine's assembled. Let's assemble a bolt. Now the bolt has a firing pin and the extractor in it. Have to find all of our little parts. Here is the firing pin spring. Firing pin. Extractor, spring and plunger. And the extractor. We have extractor, spring and plunger, the extractor, the firing pin return spring, and we need the pin for the firing pin. We'll drop the spring in place. I put the closed end toward the firing pin because I think you want the bigger end to be against the rounded pin, which acts as its seat or stop. And we now push the pin in. Firing pin's in place, end is free. The extractor goes in quite easily. At least usually they do. You put the plunger and spring in, then you push the extractor in after it, and when it gets in place it'll usually snap down or you can force it down. And now the extractor plunger not only activates or spring loads the extractor, but also locks it in place so it can't back out because it's on top of that shoulder. And we need to have the extractor move in far enough that it does what every extractor is supposed to do. It'll hold the cartridge up in place on the bolt face. And it does very willingly. We need about 15 to 25 thousandths spring out. We've got probably pretty close to 25. Now on some guns, the extractor will not hold a case on the bolt face. The problem is that when they cut this, they cut a little bit too much out right here, and the extractor pushes it down and off. And those guns won't extract or won't eject well at all. The cure is relatively simple. If you have a Fordham tool, you can take a small burr and just very carefully put a very small pocket right here. so that there's something for the extractor to push the case against and into, so that it won't push it down off, it will push it that direction. And that very slight pocket, just 5 thousandths deep, is enough to hold that case in place, which it must do because the ejector can't get at it if it's not there. So when you're cleaning your gun, you might check that extractor fit and see to it that it does hold. See to it that you have 15 to 25 thousandths spring out. And if it doesn't, then make the corrections as necessary so the extractor will hold that cartridge up there. Now I guess we'll go to work on putting the barrel in the receiver, which is extremely simple. Like I said before, these screws are long. It seems like they take forever to tighten up. There are Allen wrenches around. I don't have one for this size that have kind of an Allen ball on the end and a driver handle, and they're much faster for Allen screws. Okay, the barrel's on. Now, if this is for real, I'd use an Allen wrench and torque that down pretty snug so it won't loosen up as you shoot the gun. It's now time to assemble the trigger mechanism, because that's all we have left to do, basically. I think we'll put the bolt in, that way it'll be done. Then we'll go on the trigger assembly. Now the bolt's a little tricky to put back in, because the operating handle has to fit in the bolt right there, or should I say, the bolt has to go over the operating handle right there. And the bolt only goes in the gun with it all the way back. That means that you have to push the operating handle back as far as it'll go and hold it there and drop the bolt in place. So if you hear some screaming and cursing, it's because it's not going smoothly. Okay, I have the operating handle back as far as it'll go. I drop our bolt in and push down. Now as I push down, I let the operating handle come forward just a little bit, like 1/8 of an inch, until it found the notch and fell into place. Now if I pull a bolt back, it will try to come out. So I immediately now put the stop pin in place. Now, the bolt will not come out, because it can't come back far enough to come out. We'll start on the trigger guard. Oh my goodness, all these parts in so little time. Let's put the safety in first, because it should go in first. Now, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a hole down here in the trigger guard. The spring and plunger have to go in it. Let's take a pair of needle nose pliers and see if we can get it in there. Okay, it's in. Now, I like to put the safety in part way. Until it's almost up against the plunger. Now remember that the detents for the safety is on this side. This is solid metal here. We don't want to get the plunger in here, because it's hard to get out. You can imagine that if we had a plunger and we rotated the safety so that the plunger went up into here. So when you put the safety in, and the plunger is here, you see, when you put the safety in, see to it that you put it in with the detent notches toward the safety plunger. And you put it in going to the solid part to the notches. In other words, it'll go in this way, or this way. But do not put it in with this square notch down. Always have the detent notches toward the plunger. Because if you put it in the other way, you're going to have great difficulty getting it back out, and you may not get it back out. Now I've got the safety more or less in place, but the plunger's in the way. So what I'm going to do is take a sizable punch. And I will push the plunger all the way down into the hole without losing it, of course. And push the safety over it. Nothing to it. I think we'll assemble the trigger assembly, or trigger mechanism, and it doesn't assemble completely until it's in the gun. So all we can really do is put in the disconnector. Remember, that has the smallest pin in the gun that goes in there. Then we'll lay the sear beside it, so when the time comes it'll be easy to take care of. Good time now to put in the magazine catch. Then we'll put in the magazine catch release, which holds the catch in place. And then we put in the cross pin that holds that. There's two pins the same diameter. They're not the same length, as you can see. The long pin is the one that holds the magazine catch release in place. It's in, and it functions. Now, the pin that holds the magazine catch in place is also the pin that holds the bolt lock in place. So now's the time to put the bolt lock in the gun. And remember, it goes against this side. It'll go that way, but it won't work. Now we can put the ejector in at this time if we want, but it's usually easier to put the hammer in now, the trigger and the hammer in now. So we'll put the trigger in first. And the trigger has a spring-loaded plunger that goes in the trigger guard. And that is the trigger's return spring. This is not as hard as it looks. I've just put the trigger and I'm holding onto the sear, and I'm going to push the pin through, and it'll probably go right in. And it did, you see. So the trigger's in place, and I have set it. You want the gun to be off safe when you do that and when you put the hammer in, because it makes it much easier. The hammer has two bushings on it on each side. They're the same right and left, it doesn't matter. You put the hammer in with the notch for the full cock notch and the notch for the hammer spring guide assembly to go into rearward. And then the spring goes on the right side, and the spring has a jog in it. You want that leg down, and you want the jog going toward the inside of the trigger housing, like so. And now we'll put the hammer in. Once again, pretty easy as a rule. This is probably going to fight me this time because I said it was easy, but it's usually easy to get the hammer pin through, and it did. It went right through. Now, we're going to put the ejector in, and the pin that holds the ejector is also the pin that holds this end of the spring down. It's also the pin that the bolt lock locks against. What I do is I push the pin through, as you can see. I'll push the spring down and push the pin the rest of the way through. Now then, the bolt lock is now spring loaded. And that's what that spring on the side of the hammer is. It's actually the bolt lock spring. Now we have to put in the hammer spring. Sometimes they're a little tricky, but as a rule they just kind of fall into place. And this one just kind of fell into place. We put the trigger housing assembly into place and put in its 2 pins. Oops, wrong direction. There's a few things that you want to check for, of course, and I think we've covered most of them as we assemble the gun, but you want to check the extractor fit and make sure that it indeed holds the cartridge case up in place in the bolt face. And you want to see to it that the ejectors, one of them at least, is high enough to reliably eject. If you're having an ejection problem, check your extractor fit. If it doesn't hold the cartridge case up in place, that's probably your culprit. The extractor cut could be too far from the chamber. You could deepen that slightly very carefully so that the extractor can get a better bite on the front edge of the cartridge rim if you want, and that may be the cause of it. Oftentimes, though, it's the fact that the ejector in the magazine or the ejector or the ejector itself are too low, and the bolt can raise enough that the cartridge rim is not in line with the ejector and it doesn't get ejected. The easiest way to correct that, and we'll punch this back out and I'll show you very quickly, but it will require a tool press in most cases to correct. What you do, you drill a small hole down through the center of the ejector slot in the trigger guard itself, and you go down into the metal of the trigger guard here, but do not go into the magazine catch. Be shy of that. So you go in about 75 thousandths probably. And then where the spring would go, where you have the hole, you put a small notch, not very deep, probably 50 thousandths, for the clearance for the spring. And then you take a small light spring, about 4 coils long, you drop in the hole and put the ejector in place, and if necessary, deburr the hole until the ejector is free to move up and down, about 50 thousandths of an inch. That way the ejector will always be dragging on the bottom of the bolt, and will always be in alignment, in a position to knock out that cartridge case when it comes back there. It's a relatively simple fix. One that used to be common on the guns now is not very often necessary. And the trigger job can be done, and on the Ruger, you need to see to it that the hammer is positive. Now see, that hammer cams back, so that's good. And then all you do for a trigger job on a Ruger, and when you take the trigger guard out and assemble the trigger guard or trigger assembly and the hammer on the outside of the guard, you can see exactly how the sear fits. All you do is chop off the back of the sear, the actual portion of the sear that goes in the hammer notch, at about a 45-degree angle, so that you have basically lessened the amount of engagement that the sear has in the full caulk notch. Now, if you don't understand that, don't cut, because that's the hard part to get. They are restricted. At least I believe they are still restricted. But other than that one caution, it is a fairly easy gun to do a trigger job on. They always feel a little spongy though, because we have aluminum parts with steel pins that are sloppy fit. And so the trigger pull on a Ruger always has a little take-up and a little sponginess, and that's kind of hard to get out of, get away from. So accept that, but you can have a very nice let-off if you do it right. Whenever you do a trigger job, always check to make sure that the safety still functions, because when you do a trigger job, the fit of the safety to the sear must be much more precise. And if it's off, and you can fire the gun with it on safe, you must take the sear out and have someone with a TIG machine TIG up the bottom edge of the sear and refit it, so that when the safety is on, the trigger can hardly move at all. Just a couple of thousandths movement is all you want. So a trigger job can be done, but with some caution. Be careful. If this kind of stuff interests you, You might look into our professional series, and we have one whole section that deals only with 22 rifles and covers trigger pulls and feeding, extraction, ejection in detail. You'll learn a lot from that, and this is a good place to start. But if it really does interest you, you might look into going with that series. It's only natural for a gun that's been around a long time and has sold large quantities to have a lot of accessories available for it, and this gun is no exception. It has a lot of accessories. They normally come with a scope mount supplied by Ruger, and that scope mount takes Weaver rings. In this particular case, the gun has a Weaver scope base, and it has, wouldn't you know it, a Weaver scope and rings to go on it. So, and this gun can shoot quite well, so a scope makes sense. Now, if you're used to shooting running rabbits or running squirrels or something that's running rapidly, you can put on a muzzle brake, or in this case it's called a muzzle brake, but it's really designed to stop muzzle rise so that the gun doesn't move up quite as much, and you can get the second shot off accurately just a touch faster. Kind of expensive, but it looks good. It really does look good on there. Then we have a multitude of other things. Now, of course, the stocks on the Rugers tend to be a little bit short, and you can put a pad on it by cutting and putting a pad on, or you can buy this accessory and fits right here on the butt. Just takes off the butt plate and goes back on over where the butt plate was to extend the stock a little over an inch. And it uses the original screws. Then we have a bunch of magazines, and these are Butler Creek magazines. We have one with plastic lips, one with steel lips, and another 25 shot that has plastic lips. Now, it's interesting to note that on these Butler Creeks, the one with plastic lips, at least for the time being, do not have the ejector built into them like the Ruger magazine does. But the steel lip Butler Creek magazine does indeed have the ejector built into it. This is a better magazine because of that. Then Ramline makes a series of magazines, and they're novel in that they have a wound coil spring that unwinds as you load it and winds back up like a snail sort of to propel the follower. I don't remember who designed or came up with that type of spring. It might have been Eagle, I'm not sure. But anyway, a lot of people are using it now. The Butler Creek does, and Ramline on these magazines do. Ramline has a slight edge in that they stack them up. This particular magazine is 30 rounds compared to the Butler Creek 25 round. You see, it's quite a bit smaller. And then this is the 50 round. And then Ramline also makes a extended magazine catch or magazine release. It goes in like so and sticks way up. So it makes taking the magazine out much easier. I like this gadget. Eagle makes a long magazine. This is the 30 round magazine. Looks wild. I've never used an Eagle magazine for the 1022. And then Eagle also makes a peep sight adapter, or peep sight add-on. And what you do is you knock out the front sight and dovetail in this front sight, and then where the screw holes, or where the screws go to hold the scope base on, the receiver sight screws to there. So you have a pretty good receiver sight system. And because the receiver is high, you must replace the front sight also. That's why it comes with the front sight. Then we have a neat little magazine here. This is a CMF. It's a 50 shot, and I think it's neat. It's not so bulky. Has an interesting shape. And it's relatively interesting to load. I'm going to show you how to do it just real quick. Take off the cover and put in your little winding device. And then you can wind it up and put shells in this way, or you can put them in the front and move it a notch and move it a notch and move it a notch. But it's easier just to wind it up, and then each space gets a shell on the outside. As you wind this up, it'll wind all the way so that basically what amounts to the follower all the way up against the feed lips. So the shell's on that whole distance. If nothing else, it just looks good when it feeds. I have to get one of these for sure. And then everything stows So you load it and put it away, and your loading apparatus goes inside the magazine. Ready to go, 50 shots. Then we have the full course and accessories, and they have a lightweight hammer and this mainspring. I'm not sure of the value of this. I think if you're doing target work, this might be a slight advantage. And if you ruin your Ruger hammer or lose it, this would be a good idea to have, let me tell you. And they also make a gadget that I like, and that is a quick release bolt stop. So that when you lock the bolt back, and it's kind of awkward to get back down, this one is very quick and easy. You put this in, and the bolt lock back operation is much easier. And then of course we have custom stocks. This is custom rifle in a bag. Plastic and plastic. Little different shape, does the same thing. And now what we're going to do is we're going to make ourselves a quick custom rifle by using a folding stock accessory and some other accessories that you haven't seen yet, just for the fun of it. Okay, boys and girls, blazing saddles, here we come, fully equipped, ready for the parade. Here we have a just about full dress Ruger 1022. This happens to be a CMT stock, but Butler Creek makes a folder like this also. And we have the regular plastic stock that you saw earlier. We now have a scope sight on the gun. We have a plastic, dark plastic handguard with a ventilated barrel sleeve with a sling swivel on it, and we have the muzzle brake. And then we have the 50-round magazine that I like so well. One of the features I like about it, besides that cute little belt that feeds it, is that we have something else for your belt right here. So you can be full dress gun. When you put about 20 of these around your belt, you'd be full dress too. I think a guy could have a lot of fun with one of these. In fact, I'm going to later on. Now this has the muzzle brake, as we mentioned earlier, but this is an Eagle flash hider or flash suppressor that fits over the barrels that have a front sight still on them, and they look nice too. I don't think they do much muzzle jump reduction, but they look good. Now all of these goodies that you have just seen are available from Gun Accessories Supply Company in Hayward, California. And if your dealer can't get them, if you'll give them a call, they can fix you right up. Now I'm going to show you an accessory that's no longer made, but it's really a neat gadget. You're going to get a kick out of this one. Well, here it is, boys and girls. This is the calico attachment that takes two 1022s and makes it look a lot like a Browning machine gun. It's really clever, and it's a lot of fun to shoot. The fire control system is kind of cute in that it takes two guns, and we have the trip rod or trip assembly for the two triggers for the two guns. Then we see that when we turn the crank, there are two cams with two lobes on each one. So for every turn of the handle, there would be 4 shots fired. So if you want to shoot the gun, it has kind of a safety. Of course, the guns have a safety too. Take the gun safeties off, and then you squeeze the trigger, which is right here. And squeezing that trigger pulls the two trip rods closer to the triggers. When I turn the crank, the cams will force it to rock or rotate, tripping each trigger. So if the gun were loaded, it would continue to shoot as long as I turn the crank. The neat thing about it is it's legal in every state, I think, except California. But it's a neat looking thing, I think. Let's go out and have some fun with it. Now, wasn't that fun? There's another accessory of sorts that you can get for 1022 if you're interested in real extreme accuracy, and that is heavy barrels. You can have a custom gunsmith build you one, or you can buy the sort of drop-in barrels, or you can have the receiver modified so that the barrel screws in for the ultimate in 22 semi-automatic accuracy. Well, that's about it. There's a lot of things that you can add to your 1022 to make it more accurate, more fun to shoot, more interesting to look at. It's a neat gun. They work well. They're relatively inexpensive. But since you've bought this tape, you probably already have one. If you don't have one, you probably ought to run out and buy one. And if you already have one, you probably ought to buy another, don't you think? You never know, you might run across one of these gadgets. Then you'll have to have two. See you next time.